This case involves the disappearance of a 3-year-old child. What you're about to hear is drawn from official police files, court records, and forensic reports, handled with accuracy, not sensationalism. If you're sensitive to cases involving children, please take care of yourself as you watch. Welcome to the Crime Case Files Collective. Every case we cover, we go past the headlines and into the actual file. The forensics, the timeline, the parts of the story most coverage leaves out. If that's what brought you here, hit subscribe now and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We've got viewers in more than 80 countries, and every one of you following these cases keeps them from being forgotten. Today, we're opening the Madeleine McCann file. Not the abduction story you already know, the forensic one, the one built on dog alerts, DNA swabs, and a detail involving something you probably have in your own kitchen right now. A detail that almost changed everything. Stay with us. This one gets precise fast. There are no theses, there are facts. That's Gonçalo Amaral, the detective who led the hunt for Madeleine McCann. Not a theory, not a headline. An on-record answer to a direct question. Who are the most likely suspects in this case? His answer: Kate and Jerry McCann. Say that sentence out loud, and it sounds impossible. 2 doctors, 2 parents, a missing 3-year-old girl with a rare mark in her right eye that made her recognizable on every poster printed in 19 years. And the detective who spent longer inside this case file than almost anyone alive points not outward, at a stranger, but inward, at the 2 people the entire world had already decided were victims. This is Madeleine McCann's case, not the version you've heard on the news for 2 decades. The version buried inside the forensic record, the dog alerts, the DNA, the rental car, and one piece of ordinary kitchen equipment that a Portuguese detective believed could hold the actual explanation for what happened inside apartment 5A on the night of May 3, 2007. Before we go further, hit subscribe. This channel exists to put the actual case file in front of you, not the headline version. If you're new here, welcome. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Here's what the official record actually shows. On one side, an abduction theory, built on a locked apartment, an open window, and strangers seen circling that building in the days before Madeleine vanished. On the other, a Portuguese police file that concluded, in writing, that there was no proof of a break-in, and specific indications, they said, of negligence and concealment. 2 theories, same evidence. Wildly different endings. Picture it. Torch beams crossing a resort car park after midnight. Radios crackling between officers who don't yet know if they're searching for a lost child or something else entirely. That's the atmosphere this case file was built inside. And somewhere between those 2 theories sits a detail almost nobody talks about. A piece of equipment so ordinary you probably have one in your kitchen right now. Something that led one detective to build a case so specific it nearly resulted in criminal charges against the 2 people everyone assumed were grieving parents. We're going to walk through exactly how he got there, the science, the timeline that doesn't add up, and the witness sighting that changes the shape of that entire night. Ask yourself something before we start. If the evidence in your own home pointed one way, and your public image demanded another, which one would win? Before she was a name on a missing poster in 80 countries, she was a baby born on May 12, 2003, in Leicester, England, the result of years of fertility treatment that her parents rarely spoke about publicly. Kate Healy and Jerry McCann had married in 1998, 5 years after meeting. Both were NHS doctors. Kate, a GP. Jerry, a cardiologist who would go on to become a professor of cardiac imaging. Twins followed in 2005, also conceived through IVF, a family shaped in part by how hard it had been to build. Look closely at any photograph of Madeleine and you'll notice it immediately. A small, dark flare in the iris of her right eye. a rare condition called coloboma, a gap in the eye's structure present in roughly 1 in 10,000 people. It's the detail that made her instantly identifiable on every appeal that followed. It's also, quietly, one of the cruelest ironies of this entire case. The one physical marker that should have made her impossible to lose in a crowd. Now picture the morning of May 3rd, 2007. An ordinary holiday morning in a Portuguese resort town. Kate McCann is dressing her daughter and notices something on the front of Madeleine's pajama top. A large brown stain. She notes it. She moves on. It's the kind of thing any parent would barely register on a busy morning with 3 young children to get ready. Except it was never explained. Not that day. Not in the 19 years since. It sits in the official case file exactly as she reported it. Unresolved. Unremarked. Waiting. Here's the knowledge gap most coverage skips past entirely. If you're building the abduction theory, a stranger, a window, a snatched child, that stain means nothing. Just laundry. Just a normal morning. But if you're building the other theory, the one Portuguese investigators would eventually pursue, that stain becomes something else. A question mark placed hours before anyone knew anything was wrong. You don't know yet which theory is right. Neither did the investigators standing in that apartment days later. That's the position this case puts you in from the very first hour. Every ordinary detail, retroactively, becomes evidence. The family had arrived in Praia da Luz 5 days earlier, on April 28th, for what should have been an unremarkable week-long holiday. 9 adults, 12 children, a quiet coastal village that filled with British tourists every summer. Nothing about the setting suggested danger. By the time the sun set on May 3rd, that would no longer be true. Praia da Luz translates, almost too poetically, to Beach of Light. A small resort town on Portugal's Algarve coast, home to roughly 1,000 permanent residents, swelling each summer with British families chasing sun and cheap flights. Locals had a nickname for it, Little Britain. That's how familiar, how safe, this place felt to the people who came back year after year. The McCanns were traveling with 7 close friends, David and Fiona Payne, Matthew and Rachel Oldfield, Jane Tanner and her partner Russell O'Brien, and Fiona's mother, Diane Webster, several connected through medical careers. 9 adults, 12 children, 5 nights into what had been, by every account, a peaceful holiday. Each evening, the group ate dinner together at the resort's tapas restaurant, a booking they'd specifically requested because it gave them a clear sightline to the apartment block where their children slept. Every 20 to 30 minutes, one parent would slip away from the table and walk the short distance back to check the rooms. It was their system. It had worked all week. Now here's the detail most retellings of this case skip entirely, the one that happened before anyone knew there was anything to look for. The day before Madeleine disappeared, a neighbor later told police they'd seen a man watching apartment 5A from outside. That report wasn't made until after the disappearance, which means, at the time, nobody thought it mattered enough to mention. Then came May 3rd itself. Multiple separate sightings, logged by different witnesses, in different parts of the resort, within hours of each other. Around 2:30 in the afternoon, a girl on the balcony above apartment 5A watched a man exit through the gate below, pausing to look both ways, before pulling it shut quietly with both hands. Deliberate enough that she remembered it. Between 4 and 6 that evening, other witnesses separately reported blonde-haired men near an empty apartment 2 doors down, near the stairwell, and out on the street. None of these individuals were ever identified. Not one. Ask yourself, if you'd been sitting at that dinner table, glancing back at that building every half hour, would any of this have registered as a warning? Or would it have looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like? A busy resort, full of strangers, on an ordinary evening. That's the question investigators couldn't answer either. Whether these sightings were surveillance ahead of an abduction or simply the unremarkable noise of a tourist town in high season was never determined. It's one of the first genuine forks in this case, and it happened before Madeleine McCann's absence was even discovered. By nightfall, none of it had been reported to police. There was nothing yet to report. That was about to change. 2:29 in the afternoon. Kate McCann lifts her camera and takes a photograph of her daughter, sitting poolside beside her father and 2-year-old sister. She doesn't know it yet, but that image will become the last confirmed photograph of Madeleine McCann alive. It will run on television screens, in newspapers, on posters taped to windows across Europe for the next 19 years. 5 o'clock. The resort's kids club brings Madeleine and the twins back to the family for an early dinner. By 5:40, Kate has collected them and returned to apartment 5A. Bath time. Pajamas. The ordinary choreography of putting 3 young children to bed on holiday. Jerry is there briefly before he leaves, just after 6, to play in a men's tennis match. His presence on the court confirmed independently by other players and coaching staff. Nothing about the next hour looks unusual from the outside. But you need to understand what unusual means in this case, because it rarely looks the way you'd expect. Kate is now alone in the apartment, with all 3 children. Sometime around 6:30 to 6:45, family friend David Payne stops by. Jerry had asked him to check in while he was on the court. And here is where this case splits for the first time, in a way that has never fully closed. Payne told investigators he went in through the patio doors, saw Kate fresh from the shower, saw the children already in their pajamas, and stayed roughly 3 to 5 minutes. Kate's first account was different. She said he'd only knocked and spoken from the doorway, without stepping inside. She later revised that, placing him at the threshold for about 30 seconds. 2 people, 1 brief visit, 2 accounts that still don't match, 19 years later. Investigators considered this moment critical, for a specific reason. It's the last time any independent witness reported seeing Madeleine alive. At 7, Jerry returns from tennis. He says he finds the children on the living room sofa. Remember that detail. It matters later. Between 8 and 8:30, both parents put the children to bed. Madeleine in the single bed closest to the door. The twins in travel cots in the middle of the room. At 8:35, Kate and Jerry walk 55 meters to the tapas restaurant and sit down with their friends. 9:05. Jerry makes the first evening check. He notices the bedroom door, which he says he'd left slightly ajar, is now almost fully open. He pulls it nearly closed, doesn't step inside, and walks back to dinner. In his first police interview the following day, he said he'd entered through the locked front door. In his second interview, a week later, he changed that account, saying he'd come in through the unlocked patio doors at the back. Portuguese police formally noted the inconsistency. It has never been resolved. At 9:15, Jane Tanner steps away from the table to check on her own daughter. Walking past apartment 5A, she says she sees a man carrying a child up the street. That sighting would drive headlines for years, until 2013, when British investigators traced it to an innocent father carrying his own daughter home, closed. At 9:30, Matthew Oldfield checks the apartment for the group. He listens at the bedroom door. He hears the twins. He does not see Madeleine. He does not go in. 10 o'clock. Kate McCann walks into apartment 5A to check on her children one final time before bed. The bed closest to the door is empty. Within minutes, apartment 5A stopped being a family's holiday rental and became something else entirely, a crime scene. Except nobody treated it that way. Not yet. Word spread fast. Guests spilled out of their apartments. A crowd gathered directly outside the children's bedroom window, the same window investigators would later need to examine for footprints, fibers, any trace of how someone might have entered. By the time anyone thought to protect that ground, it had already been walked over, again and again, by well-meaning strangers trying to help. Here's the number that should stop you. Roughly 20 people entered that apartment before it was ever formally sealed. 20 sets of hands, 20 pairs of shoes, moving through a space that may have held the only physical answers to what happened to Madeleine McCann. One responding officer dusted the bedroom's exterior shutter for fingerprints, without gloves. Think about what that means. Every surface he touched afterward, potentially, carried his own prints, layered over whatever had been there before. According to Kate McCann, police did place tape across the bedroom doorway that night. But by 3 in the morning, that tape was gone, and the scene was never formally secured. Then came the part of this story that still stuns investigators who review the file today. Apartment 5A sat untouched for a month, not sealed, not preserved. It was rented out again, to holidaymakers, sleeping in the same rooms, using the same surfaces, for weeks, while the search for a missing child continued just meters away. It wasn't until August 2007, 3 full months after Madeleine vanished, that the apartment was finally sealed for proper forensic examination. Ask yourself what 3 months of Algarve's summer heat, foot traffic, and holiday guests does to trace evidence that might have existed on day 1. By the time forensic teams got serious access, whatever had been there in May had been walked over, slept on, cleaned around, and baked in Portuguese sun for 90 days. This is the part of the record that doesn't get argued about. Both sides of this case, the abduction theory and the parental involvement theory, agree on this much. The scene was compromised. Badly. Whatever evidence existed, in either direction, had already been damaged before anyone with a forensic kit got a real look at it. And that failure is exactly why what happened 2 months later, when specialist dogs arrived from England, would matter so much. Because by then, the easy answers were already gone. What was left was going to require science most people had never heard of. July 2007. 2 specialist dogs land in Portugal, flown in from England, and the entire direction of this investigation is about to change. Their names were Eddie and Keela. Eddie was trained to detect the specific compounds released by human decomposition, what handlers call cadaver detection scent. Keela was trained exclusively to detect blood, at concentrations invisible to the human eye. Both were handled by the same specialist, a veteran of South Yorkshire Police. And Eddie's record mattered enormously here. Across more than 200 prior cases, he had never once produced a confirmed false positive. Picture the scene inside apartment 5A. A dog moving room to room, off-leash, nose low, while investigators stand back and watch for the signal. A sudden stillness, a sit, a change in breathing they've learned to read like a second language. Eddie alerted 4 times. Behind the sofa in the living room, the exact spot Jerry McCann had described finding his children seated hours before Madeleine's disappearance. Inside the parents' bedroom wardrobe, on a soft toy belonging to Madeleine, and on an item of Kate McCann's clothing, recovered from the villa the family had since relocated to. The McCanns had an explanation, and it was a reasonable one. Kate was a working GP with regular professional contact with deceased patients. A trace scent on her clothing could plausibly trace back to her job, not to her daughter. Investigators noted that explanation. They didn't dismiss it. But they didn't stop there either. Then both dogs were taken to a rental car, a silver sedan the McCanns had leased on May 27th, 24 days after Madeleine disappeared. Eddie alerted in the trunk. Keela alerted in the same spot, and separately, on a door key fob. Samples went to a forensic laboratory in Birmingham. The initial finding: 15 out of 19 DNA markers consistent with Madeleine's genetic profile. Portuguese police described this publicly as an 88% match. It made headlines around the world. Here's the knowledge gap that changes everything, and it rarely makes it into the retelling. The lab didn't stand behind that number. The sample size was extremely small, what forensic scientists call a low copy number, meaning there wasn't enough material to draw a confident conclusion. And there was a second problem. Madeleine's parents and siblings had all used that same car throughout the holiday. Shared family DNA could produce a partial match without Madeleine's specific profile ever having been present. The laboratory ultimately reclassified the entire result as inconclusive. So where does that leave you? A dog with a near-perfect track record, alerting 4 times inside a home and once inside a car, rented weeks after a child vanished. And underneath it, a DNA result too fragile to prove anything in a courtroom. 2 facts, pointing in different directions, depending on which one you choose to trust. But there was one more detail about that trunk that investigators couldn't explain away with shared family genetics. Something about the physical condition of what was actually recovered. Something that, in the brutal heat of a Portuguese summer, should never have looked the way it did. That detail is where this case stops being circumstantial. And it's where one detective's past case walks back into the room. Here's the detail that turned circumstantial evidence into a working theory. What the lab recovered from that trunk wasn't dried. It wasn't degraded. It was in a fluid state. And in the Algarve, where summer temperatures regularly climb past 40 degrees Celsius, biological material left in the open should dry out and break down within days, not weeks. Something didn't match the climate. To investigators, that meant one thing. If material had first been kept somewhere cold, genuinely cold, not just shaded, before later being placed in a hot vehicle, it would behave completely differently than material simply exposed to summer heat since the day Madeleine disappeared. Cold storage slows post-mortem changes dramatically. Remove that material from cold storage and expose it to extreme heat, and it begins to liquefy. Fluid, not residue. That was the forensic logic. And it became the foundation of what investigators inside the case would come to call, simply, the refrigerator theory. To understand why one detective found that theory so convincing, you need to understand a case he'd already closed 2 years earlier, a few miles down the coast. In August 2004, an 8-year-old girl named Joana Cipriano vanished from a village near Praia da Luz. No witnesses to an abduction. No forced entry. No stranger in the frame. The detective leading that investigation was Gonçalo Amaral, the same man who would later lead the hunt for Madeleine McCann. His investigation turned toward the girl's own family. Her uncle eventually confessed and told police her remains had been placed inside the family's home refrigerator before final disposal. Biological evidence consistent with Joana was later confirmed inside that same refrigerator. In 2005, 2 family members were convicted of murder, without a body ever being recovered. It remains, to this day, one of the only convictions of its kind in Portuguese legal history. So when Amaral looked at the McCann case, same region, same brutal summer heat, a child gone with no confirmed sighting after a specific hour, and now, forensic material behaving exactly like something that had spent time in cold storage, he wasn't looking at a new pattern. He was looking at one he'd already solved. Around the same period, a separate detail surfaced that seemed almost too specific to ignore. Jerry McCann had reportedly posted, on the family's official search campaign blog, that the freezer at the villa they'd since moved into had broken down, and that he'd personally replaced it and disposed of the old unit at a local dump. That post was reportedly edited or taken down within 24 hours of going up. When investigators followed up with the villa's owners, they said they'd never been told about any breakdown and had never authorized a replacement. Jerry had handled the entire transaction without their knowledge. The timing lined up with the exact window investigators considered most critical, the 3 to 4 weeks following Madeleine's disappearance. So Portuguese prosecutors authorized something extraordinary. Every refrigerator and freezer across the entire resort and the surrounding town was to be located and examined. Officers focused specifically on any unit showing signs of recent removal or unusual disposal. One unit inside the resort had been dismantled and taken away shortly after Madeleine vanished. A discarded unit turned up at a local dump, matching the general description from the blog post. Ask yourself what it would take to convince a veteran detective, a man who had already secured one conviction on almost this exact scenario, that history was repeating itself just miles from where it happened the first time. But here's what stopped this theory cold, and it's the part almost no one covers. Amaral's team had identified what they believed was a possible interim location, an apartment near the local cemetery, still under active investigation. And then, before that search could be completed, he was removed from the case entirely. What happened next would decide whether any of this could ever be proven at all. September 7, 2007. Kate McCann walks into the Polícia Judiciária station in Portimão. She will not leave for 11 hours. Inside, investigators present her with 48 formal questions. She answers one. On the remaining 47, she exercises her legal right to silence. Picture that room. Fluorescent light. A recorder running. Hours stacking on hours while the same ground gets covered from different angles. The discovery at 10 p.m., whether she'd touched the window or the curtains. What medication, if any, had been given to the children that evening. And a detailed accounting of every minute she'd spent alone in that apartment before Jerry returned from tennis. According to her legal team, investigators outlined a specific scenario during that interview, an accidental event followed by concealment, and indicated that acknowledging that version of events could lead to more lenient legal treatment. Kate rejected the framing entirely. 11 hours in, the final question was put to her directly. Did she have any responsibility or involvement in her daughter's disappearance? She stayed silent. Ask yourself what 48 questions and one answer actually tells you. Is it the silence of someone protecting themselves from a false accusation, or the silence of someone protecting something else? Investigators inside that room walked away with two very different theories about what they'd just witnessed, and so did the public, once word of it reached the press. Jerry McCann was formally questioned too, under the same official suspect status. Both parents maintained, then and now, that they had no involvement in what happened to their daughter, and that the forensic findings against them had been misread. Here's the twist most coverage buries. Despite the dog alerts, the disputed DNA, the freezer post, and the refrigerator theory building underneath all of it. In July 2008, Portuguese prosecutors formally lifted both parents' suspect status. The case was archived, not solved, not closed with an answer. Archived, officially, for insufficient evidence to proceed toward any charge. That's the sentence this entire theory eventually collided with. A detective with a proven precedent, forensic material that shouldn't have looked the way it did, a timeline full of unexplained gaps, and still, not enough to cross the legal threshold a prosecution requires. So if the evidence wasn't enough to charge the parents, where does that leave the original theory the world started with? A stranger, a window, an abduction in the night. Because there's a witness sighting from that exact evening that most coverage of this case has never given the weight it deserves. And Scotland Yard itself would later call it more significant than anything reported that night. 10 p.m. A retired businessman named Martin Smith is walking home through the streets of Praia da Luz with his family when a man comes toward him, walking fast, carrying a small child in his arms. The child is barefoot, light-colored pajamas, roughly 3 or 4 years old. Smith's wife asks him, almost instinctively, "Is she asleep?" The man says nothing. He keeps walking, away from the resort, toward the beach, less than half a kilometer from apartment 5A. The Smiths flew home to Ireland the next morning, before they even knew a child had been reported missing. When the news reached them days later, that encounter wouldn't leave them alone. They flew back to Portugal and gave formal statements. In 2013, Scotland Yard reviewed both major civilian sightings from that night and concluded that the Smith sighting, not the more widely reported one, most closely matched the actual time frame of Madeleine's disappearance. The man carrying that child has never been identified. But less than a mile from where the Smiths saw him, another man was already living. One German investigators would eventually place at the center of an entirely separate case file. Christian Bruckner had lived in and around the Algarve on and off since the mid-1990s, working odd jobs, accumulating a criminal record that included burglary, drug offenses, and, earlier in his life, convictions for sexual offenses against children. By 2007, he was based close to Praia da Luz. In 2019, he was sentenced to 7 years for the 2005 rape of a 72-year-old American woman, in that same town, 2 years before Madeleine disappeared. In 2020, German prosecutors publicly named him the prime suspect in Madeleine's disappearance. In 2016, a search of a property connected to Bruckner turned up a hard drive, recovered from beneath a deceased dog on the site. Investigators say it contained material they considered evidence of intent toward children, along with image files from Portugal dated around the time Madeleine vanished, and information tying Bruckner to a dam roughly 56 kilometers away that German investigators have called a significant area of interest. In October 2024, Bruckner stood trial on 5 unrelated sexual offense charges. He was acquitted on all counts, with the court citing unreliable witnesses, though that acquittal is now, according to recent reporting, under appeal. He served out his existing sentence and was released from a German prison in September 2025, fitted with an electronic monitor and required to surrender his passport. British investigators requested an interview ahead of his release. He declined. Then, this past June, British tabloid The Sun reported, citing unnamed sources, that a dossier of German investigative material had been handed to Operation Grange officers. No Metropolitan Police statement has confirmed the dossier's existence or contents. What is confirmed is this: a small team of detectives is actively building a file for the Crown Prosecution Service on suspicion of abduction and murder, and Operation Grange remains, officially, a missing persons inquiry, not a murder case. That classification is the wall standing between this investigation and any possibility of extraditing Bruckner from Germany. Upgrading it has not happened. So here is where this case actually stands. 2 working theories, each with its own detective, its own forensic reasoning, its own unresolved gap. One points inward, at 2 parents who were never charged. The other points outward, at a convicted offender who has never been charged either, for this. Ask yourself which theory the evidence you've just heard actually supports. Because 19 years later, no court, no lab, and no confession has answered that question for you. 19 years. That's how long this question has sat unanswered, and the legal battle around it very nearly outlasted the case itself. In 2009, the McCanns filed a libel suit against Gonçalo Amaral over the book he'd written laying out his theory, seeking roughly 1.2 million euros. The case ran for over 13 years, through Lisbon's appeals courts, through Portugal's Supreme Court, which ultimately ruled in Amaral's favor, reinstating his book, and stating that any damage to the McCanns' reputation had come from their official suspect status during the investigation itself, not from anything Amaral had published. The McCanns took it further, appealing to the European Court of Human Rights. In September 2022, that court unanimously rejected their application, finding that Portugal had provided a fair judicial process throughout. For Amaral, those 13 years cost him financially, cost him his health by his own account, and effectively ended his public career. For the McCanns, the legal chapter closed with a verdict that changed nothing about the actual question. What happened inside apartment 5A remains exactly as unresolved as it was in 2007. Not everything from these 2 decades has been lost, though. The McCann's advocacy, whatever you make of the rest of this case, produced something real. In 2012, the European Union adopted a cross-border missing children alert system modeled on the Amber Alert that they lobbied for directly. That framework exists today in countries across Europe because of work that came directly out of this case. Operation Grange, meanwhile, has cost British taxpayers more than £13 million, with continued funding approved through 2026. It remains open. It remains classified as a missing persons inquiry. And somewhere in that file sits a detail almost no coverage of this case gives its proper weight. A barefoot child in light pajamas, carried away from that resort at 10 p.m. by a man who has never been identified. Seen by witnesses, Scotland Yard itself considers more credible than anything else reported that night. So where does that leave you? 2 theories. 2 detectives who each believed, with real evidence behind them, that they'd found the answer. A refrigerator theory that explained forensic material no one could otherwise account for, and ran straight into a legal wall built from insufficient evidence. A prime suspect with a documented history, a hard drive of disturbing material, and still, after 6 years as the named suspect, no charge in this specific case. And a sighting that fits the timeline better than any other lead in the file, attached to a man who simply walked into the dark and was never seen again. Madeleine McCann would be 23 years old this year. The investigation is still open. The question, after 19 years of forensic science, court rulings, and 2 competing detectives who each believed they'd solved it, is still exactly where it started. If this gave you something you hadn't heard before on one of the most covered cases of the last 2 decades, that's exactly what this channel is built to do. Subscribe if you're not already, and turn on notifications. We go this deep into the case file every time. Drop a comment below. Which theory does the evidence actually support for you? Share this with someone who follows this case. Every share keeps a missing child's name in front of people who might still know something. We'll see you in the next one.